Hey everyone, welcome to our first episode with Damien Conversations. Our first guest is Josh, best known for Limsbin. How you doing today, man?
I'm doing wonderfully. I don't want to date or record too much, but we've had some uncharacteristically horrible weather in Massachusetts, and now after it snowed yesterday, if you can believe it, we're now enjoying a beautiful, blustery, warm Sunday. So I feel very lucky.
Excellent. I was going to ask if you've been experiencing the polar vortex that has supposedly been hit the northeast.
We had like a sunshine hailstorm yesterday, basically, like genuinely apocalyptic weather befitting this waking nightmare of 2020.
Did it end with a rainbow at least?
Not that I saw.
Bullshit.
I know.
All right. Well, I guess just to kind of get started. So you're originally from Pittsfield, right?
I was actually born on Long Island.
Long Island. All right. Well, mention like where you born and raised, where you moved around up to
my family was living in Manhattan up through the late 80s when obviously the shit hit the fan and the city was crumbling, so they fucked off first to Stony Brook, Long Island, where I was born, and then pretty quickly I think before I even turned one, we were up here in Western Massachusetts in beautiful Pittsfield, where I am now living again. Full circle, baby.
Awesome. So was there family or something prior, like living in Pittsfield? Like was there a reason why they decided to move there?
So my dad he was an ER doc for many decades, and he was working in Manhattan doing emergency medicine, which was a pretty crazy experience in the 80s. And my mom, she's a nurse practitioner. She was doing house calls to really crazy situations in a really decaying urban environment. I think they were casting about for an idyllic, a bucolic rustic gem, and they talked to their fellow well-off doctor medical friends, and they said, look no further than Berkshire County, America's cultural. It's the best, man. I feel very lucky. I just took a walk with it's Mother's Day. I'm fucking dating it. I don't know. I took a walk with and I was walking in these woods that I've grown up next to for my entire life, and it's we would like read The Hobbit as a kid. My mom would read The Hobbit to us, then we'd go walk in the woods, and I'd be like, we're here, so it was a special place to grow up. Excellent.
And you had a brief stint in New York?
Yeah, so I grew up here in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. I went to legendary hippy-dippy liberal arts college, Hampshire College.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I got a job working in jazz radio, baby. So I took off from immediately after I finished college. I did Meals on Wheels for like a month.
Oh,
and
cool.
Then, I was like driving, food around to the elderly and infirm in rural Western Mass. And then pretty quickly started working in Tribeca. So it was a bit of a change in pace.
Yeah. So you were always a giver to the people.
Oh, Travis, I give and I give and I give, and the people they take and they take. And all I ask for is attention and money, and I think that is, I think it's an exchange we can all get behind.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, now with growing up, when you move, I guess when you moved to Pittsfield and growing up there, was there anything in regards to like any kind of music, politics, or any influences? But I mean, clearly, it seems like your parents were probably a big influence on you.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I've emerged into being a diehard Steely Dan and Grateful Dead fan, which is no mystery, given my upbringing. I remember the Grateful Dead Rainforest fundraiser compilation dedicated. Jane's Addiction does a mean cover of Ripple on it, and I remember as a kid hearing those really big drums was really influential to me because like there was something different about that recording of that song, and so I guess through the Grateful Dead via Jane's Addiction, the classic highway to rock and roll. I liked how heavy and loud Jane's Addiction sounded covering the Dead, and as a kid that was some kind of earworm because years later here I am,
Yeah,
I carouse with some of the icons and legends of the heavy world, Travis. You know that.
So I mean, was there ever a point in your youth, like preteens, teens, or whatever, where you've maybe felt a little bit different from, say, in the rest of the kids at school, or do you feel like you had like your, I guess like a grasp on things more so than they did, or were you pretty much just like always respected, or like
No,
no?
I think I distinguished myself as being one of the most sensitive humans to ever live for much of my childhood. So I think there's that classic dynamic of like, I'm being excluded versus I don't want to be a part of your group, and
Sure.
walking that fine line for a very long time. I don't think it's taken me a really long time to feel part of any community, because I've always felt for often very unearned reasons, very much like an outsider. But I guess, outside of the sensitivity I think we're all guilty of in our youth, I went from going to like a tiny Jewish day school to a slightly larger private middle school where I felt very out of place. And then all of a sudden I ended up in public high school for, ninth through 12th. And that was like a totally chaotic space where anything was, on the table. I found other likely incredibly irritating snobs where like we were the cool guys who liked the Velvet Underground and David Bowie or whatever. And we were, I'm sure, completely unbearable, but like, at this crazy environment where there were fights in the hallways and cocaine in the bathrooms, and, people called me Jew, all like, it was just like a very chaotic zone. So, yeah. And then like I grew up, I am Jewish. I grew up in a Jewish community where I think the conversation around Zionism and confronting the incredibly upsetting reality of Zionism has been a long narrative in that community. So that I think was a pretty legitimate space where I was an outsider politically, because I went to Jewish day school. Sure. I went to summer camp. I was really in a very, like, that Zionism was always a part of that world. And when I finally visited Israel in high school on my own-ish, like as part of like an exchange program, I was like, oh, I do have some very substantive, very real differences with this community. Sure. So that was, I think, a blow. Okay. That kind of validated some of that sense of outsidership. But, again, I'm, for the most part, a well-off white guy who's been incomprehensibly lucky. So I have no delusions about that.
Well, I mean, it definitely helps when you have parents or like, close friends or relatives who are supportive, I feel. I mean, because then it just seems to only like amplify further like what you want to do in life, like be it if you have to stumble across some things like, okay, I guess I'm not going to be an architect, or maybe I didn't want to be a grocer after all, whatever it might be. Yeah. So you got into journalism at some point and radio. So when did that start out? Was it around high school or something more recent, or?
Most of my life has been a happy accident. If you just overeducate someone and give them almost unlimited resources for dumb bullshit, you'd be amazed at what they can generate, Travis. Sure. Yeah, I was raised in a very NPR friendly household. I grew up listening to NPR in the car. That's some of my earliest memories were, hearing All Things Considered or Morning Edition, and having those be these really big parts of my morning and evening respectively. And it's just something that I just was literate in from a young age. And, in college, it took until college really where, I think of the classic DIY experience where you start getting into punk or something because it's really exciting world where you could just do things, and in high school we were like booking our own shows and learning how to rig PA systems, and, a pretty classic rite of passage for any young miscreant in the American underground. And then in college, you find these little community stations where they're just giving away airtime,
Nice. Yeah,
so, I would WXOJ in Florence, Massachusetts. I had to go and, actually learn how to work a board. I became the technical trainer at the station, helping to train other people. And just because it was like, yeah, you can have a show where you can bring your friends on to play music. You can review movies. You can play, your shitty hardcore punk mix CDs. And, it was just like a really exhilarating experience. And, again, the college I went to was this really open-ended, choose your own adventure, gradeless, hippie love fest. So by the end of it, I was like, okay, well, I like ethnomusicology and the study of music and society and why music is made, but I don't want to write a paper about it. I don't want to, create more academia that's just going to live in a little hermetic,
Hmm.
you know.
Sure.
So I was like, well, I love radio, and it's this dynamic, creative art form. Like, what if I learned how to tell stories about music through radio? So my degree is in ethnomusicology and radio production. And I did a documentary, and a dear friend of mine he's a Puerto Rican American man who grew up in Holyoke, Massachusetts, which is a really economically challenged, really segregated community. And he was making music about his Puerto Rican heritage, Taino culture, through the prism of like depressive 90s black metal, basically. And so I learned how to tell that story respectfully. I hope I was a kid then. You hope this shit ages well, but yeah. So then from there, I through my professor in college who taught me how to do that, I got in touch with people, some really this amazing guy, Steve Rath, who he was this dude who he produced the Jazz at Lincoln Center radio show. So I like helped him produce that. I worked with Wendell Pierce from The Wire, who was the voiceover guy. He was really cool. And but Steve was this dude who was like, he was the guy who NPR paid to cover folk festivals, like in the 60s and 70s. Because that guy who was like, I have the van, I have the equipment, just send me, I'll go do it. Like I once was like, dude, did you hear about this? Like Cecil Taylor played the White House lawn to Jimmy Carter. And Steve, a true story, Steve goes, yeah, I recorded it. The tape is right over there.
That's awesome.
Like he was that guy. So my first job out of college that wasn't Meals on Wheels in radio was insanely cool, and the kind of thing that I look back on, and it folded eventually. I was only there for a couple of years before it fell apart, and I started working for a jazz station in Newark. But it was an amazing experience.
Nice. Yeah, I guess I don't know. With my childhood, I kind of like I had a single mother, and I had 3 older brothers, and I was 10 years younger than the youngest of my older 3 brothers. So by the time I was in 1st, 2nd grade, I was alone. So then it was that search of like, friends who could kind of fill in that void of having a sibling, or of some form. And it was through them and their older brothers and sisters who were in college radio, actually. That's how I found out about a lot of like metal and punk in like elementary school. Like one of my close friends, Aaron, who's lived in DC, he's a chef, he's an amazing chef. I had moved to, I believe, my 2nd or 3rd elementary school. We moved around a lot, and we got along quickly. We were going back and forth, like, do you like AC/DC? Do you like Boston? And then he's like, do you like Iron Maiden? And I was like, who's Iron Maiden? He's like, oh, you got to come over. And so like, I called my mom, and I was just like, can I go over to this kid's house after school? He's really close by. And so I think she was just happy to find that, like, oh, he's settling in on his first day. He's met somebody. So walk over there, and he's hyping it up, explaining the album art, and he shows it to me, and then he presses play, and, it's Number of the Beast, And it was like, at that point, I knew that I was like, there was more to rock than just like at the time, what we call now dad rock, or whatever. Like, I still hold, dear, but like, that's when I kind of like my journey into metal came about. And then, then eventually get into punk and stuff. But yeah, mine was basically just bouncing around from meeting kids in school, from public school, I got threatened once to have to go to a Catholic school. And I was just like, I dare you. I dare you. I'll be kicked out so quickly. I'll try to be kicked out so quickly. So it sounds like a lot of your experiences comes from family, the schools, your journey to Israel, coming back and then getting into radio. So when was it when you decided that you wanted to actually start playing music? Or was it something out of necessity that you're like, well, screw this, I'm going to form my own project?
Well, I think, in high school, I started off recording like these genuinely, I don't even remember what came first, the terrible hardcore band or the terrible, like, just me playing electric guitar band. Because my parents, again, my mom and dad had very different backgrounds. My mom grew up single mom, working class family in Oregon. My dad grew up in a big, loud Jewish household. But, they were part of this very dynamic generation of like experiences and adventures. And, if their parents were wicked conservative, my mom's mom, she was a single mom. She worked in an office, or she grew up on a ranch in the Great Depression. So my mom, she left Oregon and like basically never turned back. So my dad was going to Jefferson Airplane shows at the Fillmore, and so that they both really wanted me to have this kind of like go get 'em spirit, which again successfully rubbed off. But I had taken guitar lessons, and I was into the Ramones and Nirvana, so this like super talented, like dignified guitar, this very patient man had to like field my requests to like not like fail to learn Megadeth songs or whatever, this is this dude who I'm sure is the incomprehensibly talented guitar player, and I'm just asking him how to play, We Want the Airwaves or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, then in high school, I think it's the classic progression where like I was a miserable kid, and eventually, all roads lead to Nirvana. There was this like cute college student who would drive me to Jewish day school, Jewish Hebrew school after normal school, and she had a Nevermind cassette. We'd listen to that in the car. But then like eventually, I read Heavier Than Heaven about Cobain, and he's like, oh, like I love Pixies, I love Black Flag, so like. Sure. I saw the Pixies in their reunion tour with my dad at UMass in 2004. I like heard Damaged, and it was the best record I ever heard. And then next step, you get to high school, and I'm listening to like Born Against and getting into and then it turns out my hometown had this like really rich connection to international hardcore bands from Osaka, like Stupid Babies Go Mad, bands from Copenhagen, like No Hope for the Kids, just relationships with this one local dude. The story. It's every story. One guy knows one thing, put out 1 7-inch, and all of a sudden
of course.
your little town's in the middle of this. So like every kid, I was like, oh my god, punk is Pittsfield's thing. This is the thing that we do, and this is so exciting. And I like wasn't very good at guitar, so I picked up a bass and started playing bass in a hardcore band and trying these horrible one-man band experiments out by myself in my basement. But it was that experience of you hit record on this thing, then all of a sudden you are officially a band. That's it. Yeah. And it's so exhilarating. And right, I'm a very I'm a willful dude, and I think I can be impatient sometimes. And but basically one thing led to another. I got a drum machine in high school, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I can do stuff over this, or me and my friends would collaborate in this very improvisational way with the drum. Like that technology, this Zoom Rhythm Track 323, opened up the possibilities for me of what music could be. Sure. And I hadn't read some book on like then I got older and I came across like the British post-punk scene in the late 70s, which is one of the most beautiful things ever, because it's literally a bunch of people being like, oh, the whole Desperate Bicycles ethos of you can do a band. It is not hard. Bust out whatever you got.
Totally.
But, so I got to college. I started to get, after sort of taking a deep breath from hardcore, I got back into hardcore because it was this really exciting time in hardcore in 2008. And I didn't want to have a band. I wanted to have something that was like for me, that was just from the hip, and something that was a mixture of the beautiful mix that's so important in extreme music of being the most ridiculous thing in the world and deeply aware that what you're doing is very silly.
Completely.
I think that tension has always been delightful to me. So yeah, that led all up to Limbsbin, where I was like, oh, like I have this thing now that's just mine. And it was 2008, man. It was crazy. Realicide was still one of the biggest bands like in the American underground. Like it was an exciting time for like really aggressive electronic music. And
sure.
I'd seen like Dan Deacon in high school, and that was so cool seeing this like one-man party machine with a pile of samplers and iPods and stuff. And I was trying to copy that.
Yeah, Dan Deacon was even if someone wasn't like a fan of his music, like didn't really purchase anything by them, you can't deny how amazing his live sets and shows were. He would play at he did this one set at First Avenue main room here. And for some of you out there, if you're not familiar with First Avenue, I'm in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and First Avenue is most infamously known in the movie Purple Rain with Prince. So all those shots where Prince is playing, that's First Avenue. And it's one of the oldest independent clubs in the US, So Dan Deacon played like on the floor, you know, and he had the crowd all on the stage behind him and all in front. The set ended with him creating a Congo line of the entire crowd. It was just kind of the sweltering thing where it looked like kind of like a pit, but no one really like being aggressive.
Okay.
And then, you know, and it just basically, we were like watching this, and I was with my friend Chuck from up top looking down, and it's like, holy shit, like the whole audience is now one big Congo line. And it was just swarming everywhere. And it was just like,
so what you're hitting on is so important, because like I would say two big artists to me at that time were Adam and His Package, where this, like,
love Adam.
A geeky, out of shape Jewish guy singing about Enya is punk and awesome. And Dan, where it was like, you can have a really physical, engaged show like a hardcore show, but it can be all electronic, and the attitude can be something that's fun and disarming and
Sure.
and refreshing and positive, you know?
Yeah.
And so what you
it's exhilarating, you know?
Right. So those were two huge influences on me. The idea of like doing something deeply personal and something that was like fun and something, you know, I think like I have so many peers who are other well-off white pricks who try to like manufacture this victim narrative in extreme music. And it's crazy to me. Life has been, you know, I have struggled with, I've experienced great struggle in my life, as we all have, but like by and large, there's very little about my personal experience that you can mine for pathos. You know, I'm a very lucky dude. So the idea of like being able to create something that would be, and it took time to figure this out with Limbsbin, but like creating something that could be fun and something that wouldn't just be, you know, a repetitive series of tropes about pain. Or even hell, even taking those tropes and just presenting them in weird ways that were slightly more self-conscious and you know, had that reflective ability. Like, I don't know, that's what I loved about, you know, seeing Dan. It was fun, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And that's awesome that you mentioned Adam and His Package, because he's a good dude. And like I know we have like a little bit of an age gap, but like the ideas as far as like how you get into it, how you want to be represented, what you take from like certain people like that is all the same. Like we, an old band of mine would do like festival shows with him, and like he was always like one of the like the moments of like the show that everybody wanted to see, because it was fun. You know, we're all like, majority of the people who were playing Fest, and this would have been, you know, I'm dating myself, like late 90s, early 2000s, but it's majority all fairly well off white kids, you know what I mean? And to see all of a sudden, just like, you know, a lot of the people we would tour with, there was always this kind of like this act of like, there was, you know, like humanity is, you know, they're in so much pain and in such a struggle. And I get if you're an energetic person live, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But when it's just an act and you're, you know, you're on a 30-day tour, it's like, I don't know if life's that hard on you where you just got to break down daily. You know, I'm kind of skeptical on that, you know. But Adam was always great. Like just seeing him live in the basements of like Extreme Noise, where there's like probably legal capacity 25 people, but there's like you know, near 100 kids in there, like knowing every word, you know, Punk Rock Academy, whatever it was. Like he was a gem. Miss that guy. But
yeah,
you know,
I think his attitude about self-expression is that I think sometimes people are hesitant to just celebrate raw creativity for what it is. Like, it's fine to be funny and clever and sweet. That act of creation is just as profound as talking about miserable things. And I don't know. Totally. I love that his music was all about imagining other worlds and talking about fantasies. And I don't know. It's so cool to get to have that actual experience with me. I never saw him live. He wrapped up when I was still pretty young.
He was friends with a handful of people here. One of my friends, Sean Tillman, who goes by Harmar Superstar, he was starting around a similar time. He's just a one-person thing. He always toured in bands, you know, and then eventually he was just like, I want to do my own thing, you know, drum machine, even a CD if he had to, you know, just to get by. And
I used to play to an iPod. I used to scream over an iPod for years.
Well, I mean, whatever, if it's just out of necessity, you know what I mean? Nothing should stop you, you know, like you should be able to do what you want to do, how you want to do it. And if it means that you have to use an iPod tonight, who cares?
Well, I just, you know, I was, you know, again, like, to perpetuate my own victim narrative, I always felt like, you know, I was literally laughed at by so many people in the hardcore scene doing limb spin, because to me,
of course,
this is punk to me. This is hardcore to me. I'm trying to like distill something about this beautiful, vulnerable, exciting experience. And like, I'm sure look, the thing that a lot of people don't want to hear from anyone in the world of making anything is that you just like, I sucked shit and was bad at it for so long. Like, I didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't have the technique to do it. I didn't have the experience to do it. It probably was laughable. I'm not insane. But like at the same time, like I would see the same people doing the laughing, wearing these uniforms and following these like ridiculous rules that meant that their band never accomplished anything, because they felt like they had to, like, if they weren't achieving, you know, if they weren't like, you know, Coro revived in the flesh, or like if they didn't nail a Kreutzen cover, like just like all these like weird, like, they self-impose all these rules. And I think most people who succeed doing a weird thing, you realize that you have to just forget. It's liberating to throw the rules away, and then it's completely humiliating to not have any structure to whatever bullshit you're doing. Totally. So like I think it's both revelatory to leave all that behind, and maybe it's impossible to not do that and then also not humiliate yourself for years. But it paid off.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like when I started to go to like some like hardcore fests in the 90s, they were so serious, you know, and they were talking about the earliest forms of cancel culture. And it seemed like it was this environment where you couldn't have fun, you know? And so and you gotta understand, like, you know, there'd be really serious, intense hardcore bands playing, but then like, you know, then there would be like Charles Bronson, who just throws a monkey wrench in that whole thing, you know, where it's just like, yeah, we sound like a hardcore band. We are a hardcore band, but you could poke fun, you know, you can like take that at least, you know, you can, you know, set a different tone. So by the time when Adam and his package were playing a lot of these hardcore shows or fests, it was the same thing. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people just like not taking them seriously. He's got a drum machine. And then when my old band reformed, we used a drum machine. We used a drum machine at the starting points of both the times we were existing. And I kind of had that concern of like, everyone's going to hate us because we had like this killer drummer, and that's how people recognized us. But it was the complete opposite, because, you know, when you have a bunch of speakers up and you're full blasting, you know what I mean? It's like, I'd like to see your drummer play that long with that much stamina, you know, impossible. So it was great. You just had to, you know, not mess up.
Well, it's funny. We're sort of on other end. The various points in the punk continuum that we experienced, you know, I kind of came into my own during the mystery guy hardcore scene, where the joke was always like, it was a mixture of like deadly serious, very stylized violence from a lot of, you know, privileged ding-dongs hitting each other in the face, coupled with the sense that there was a joke, but the joke was a mean joke from an elite group on other people.
Sure.
And then like, I think about like, similarly, you know, I'm currently reading his book, but like the great Sam McPheeters, his sense of humor, especially with Wrangler Brutes, and that record Zulu, their first full length, came out, you know, when I was in high school. And it's actually, I Googled my friend's name in 2004, and some other guy with the same name had reviewed Wrangler Brutes. And I was like, oh, this is from the guy, my friend, you know, this is the guy from Born Against, and my friend reviewed it. How crazy is that? But instead, of course, what I got was this hysterical record where the joke is as much about the performer as the audience.
Totally.
And I think that sort of riff on the mystery guy thing of like, we're little stinkers, fuck you, versus like Sam being, and his attitude of like, what I'm doing is inherently absurd, you buying into it is inherently absurd, let's marinate in that a little bit, huh? And then like, you know, Matt Corvette and Piss Jeans, or Brendan Radigan and Rival Mob, just some of the great actually funny people of punk and hardcore who like actually had a self-conscious quality that made their performances captivating. Because when people are being either deadly earnest politically or emotionally, or so ironic that there's very little emotional resonance, it's I think both of those extremes suck, and I think we've both experienced different ends of that stick.
Oh, totally. And then they mirror one another as well in different ways too, like definitely what you're explaining with, like the person, like the privileged person, like making the joke of like of everybody. And then like person like Adam in his package, who is totally confident and totally comfortable in his own, his own skin, and is able to do what he wants to do. And it is attracting people from a scene that's typically like, it's like a bingo card, do they have this uniform? Did they make sure to say this? Did they do a cover of that? So yeah, definitely. So, I mean, so you've been, what is it? It's been about a decade that you've been doing Limbspin now?
I recorded the first demo by playing my drum machine through computer speakers into GarageBand and then yelling over that in GarageBand. And yet solely by multi-tracking the demo that was still more technically advanced than the like much of the rest of my recorded output, which is funny in retrospect. But I remember I was doing that in my dorm room in college, and I was doing this terrible Joe D'Annunzio ripoff, like grunt. It was really bad. And some kid outside my window was like, "Fucking hardcore kids," or something. And I was like, yeah, it was like the first memory of recording Limbspin for the first time immediately had a bing of like humiliation and shame, which is great. Because like that really get comfortable. You should be embarrassed as soon. Maybe it's the Jewish thing with the bar mitzvah, but like it's so good to humiliate yourself, because once you get over that fear, the world is your oyster.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that started. Yeah. So my performing started a very long time ago, but with Limbspin, I guess 2008, and then in 2009, I came back with like what would be the first actual set of songs. And then I started touring so quickly after the band began seriously. Like, not, the first, after a couple shows in Western Mass, I drove out to St. Louis with a college friend of me, and was very quickly all of a sudden like, oh my God, I'm in Ohio for the first time. Or, oh, I'm in St. Louis, like at 18 or whatever,
it's exciting.
Spending the night in crazy squats in Cincinnati and playing, churches in the middle of snowstorms. And, so pretty quickly I got to dive in doing this weird and probably not very good version of the project.
Okay. So up to speed now, last year or so, when we started working together with Limbspin, at the time, when you were mentioning that you were listening to a lot of Discordance Access when you were writing Astray. So was there anything else that was influencing that record, as far as like, was there a bigger inspiration that added to that besides just sound or a feeling?
Well, I was listening to early Discordance Access, which I like the most. I think the big hot take, dear viewer, is that I think early DA, the Inalienable Dreamless, I'm fucking it up. It's a good record. I like it, but it's not my favorite Discordance Access record.
No.
I think the first, was it Ulterior, the first one?
And
I don't know.
Split with Plutocracy too. The 7-ish, the split with Plutocracy was my first introduction.
Well, there's that sound of like I'm a big Power Violence fan, and then ironically I found out in that pretty cringy grindcore doc that John Chang famously hates Power Violence. But there's some of these.
That's right, he does.
Before there was like before like this horrible ossification into genre worship, which is just so bad.
Yeah.
Because I think part of the miracle of Limbspin is that I was trying to do like a Power Violence band, but it was just terrible. Like, I think that's like I'm gonna applaud myself, a little pat on the back, like, because there's a band in Western Mass called Gray Skull who are amazing, and they were like, their whole thing was like, we like love Black Flag, but we're fucking like just can't play a song. So they had a record called Damage 3 that's one of the best Western Mass underground records ever, and it's just the most melted down. So like that kind of effort, I think, is really glorious. But anyways, with bands like Discordance Axis, all that wonderful 90s period of like really weird, fast music taking on all these different shapes. That's one of those records that sounds like it's not following any rule book. I think they forgot a distortion pedal, so the guitar just sounds like crazy, like scrappily and like it's really cool. Because I think, you know, that's Limsman in a nutshell. It is an idea of like, what if you sort of like essentialize aspects of extreme music into very like densely concentrated flavors. You know, it's more, it's like Limsman is an appetizer band, though I would argue the record I did with you is more of a meal. So anyways, I was listening to a lot of Discordance Axis, the early stuff, and I was listening to, I had finally finished Kosi Fanny Tootie's amazing autobiography.
Oh, nice.
You know, which talks at great length about her experience with Throbbing Gristle. Mm-hmm. And actually, there was a record store in Williamstown out here in Berkshire County that for years had this like live box set. You know, with which it's really cool. It's the one. It's 4 CDs. It has the exterior is like textured original Throbbing Gristle camo designs. Like it's a really the gray box, and I wanted it for years. And so years later, like, I mean, again, like literally like probably like almost a decade after I first saw this box set, I finally had enough money as a grown ass adult to buy it. So I was like really soaking up live Throbbing Gristle, which is how the band should be experienced.
Live Throbbing Gristle is incredible. All those, that was a huge inspiration for like, with some old projects is the cassettes. Just seeing the layout, you know, where it's like the layout's the same. It's just like the image is different. I love that majority of the tracks are just untitled, you know, just like and especially with a project like Throbbing Gristle, like the story of like how they became, what they came from like Cohen Productions, and like was like basically just like, you know, performance art, but with some like really disturbing messages and such, you know, that's something that really triggered a lot of people and like, you know, make them think. It made people really uncomfortable. I really love that, you know, and I felt that you could apply that to anything, whether it's a one-person project or a band, you know.
Yeah, again, you go back and you hear some shit where it's like, oh, this is like, if I saw this shit in an art gallery in 1976, it would be the craziest thing I ever heard. Totally. You know, no question. But yeah, so like I was listening to like this like really angular, intense grindcore about like, you know, all of the wonderful ideas that Discordance Axis indulges itself in. And I was listening to like the really rich, atmospheric experience of Throbbing Gristle on those records. And I've entered into the hardcore Grateful Dead era of my life. So, you know, I think with Astray, I was like, I want to have that real that punchy, dynamic 90s grind, like cerebral grind bullshit. I want to have the atmosphere of Throbbing Gristle, this like this, you're entering a space with a lot of texture and a lot of, you know, just there's this thing hanging in the air with that. And then with the Dead, I was like, well, I love how this band can, over the course of like a suite of songs, create this experience you lead someone through. Mm-hmm. When it's done well, it's exhilarating. So with Astray, it was a mixture of all those things of like, you know, a raw, nerdy 90s grindcore with these, you know, electronic soundscapes that were big and dynamic like Throbbing Gristle. And then again, arranged as it is with ambient sections and with breaths and with pacing to approximate something like a Grateful Dead show. Like that was sort of the thinking behind it.
Nice, and it's an efficient release in a short period of time as well. So
well, you know, we did it just after Yom Kippur, and I for the last 2 Yom Kippurs gone to with my girlfriend's family to a reform service. I grew up conservative, but you know, her family's more from the Reconstructionist and reform world, and I was just sort of experiencing a new kind of Judaism in a much more, I think, emotionally meaningful way, because a lot more English, a lot more meditation, a lot more. You know, a more abstract and maybe looser approach to the material. So I was really, when I was making the record, I was really stewing in things like redemption and failure. You know, there's the line, we go astray, we lead others astray. And in the Yom Kippur service, you're beating your chest as you say your crimes from your sins from the last year. And I thought that idea of like, we go astray, we lead other people astray too. And certainly living in the world we live in, living in the fractured consciousness of 21st century life, that idea of, what does it mean when we not just delude ourselves, we delude people around us? So, the fact that we got that out so quickly after I was stewing on all that, and of course, the Democratic primary, where I don't want to put you on the spot, Travis, but are you or have you ever been a supporter of Jewish socialist Bernard Sanders?
Yes, I have.
Well,
still, we don't need to get into we don't need to get into a whole lot with the outcome twice with what happened with him.
No, but it's safe to say the ship sails onward. This train is going to chug down those tracks.
I agree.
So yeah, that record is very much of its time, and it was so much fun to work with you on it because I think you understood. It felt like an urgency to get that out at the end of 2019 after this. Like, again, it's so funny from our perspective here in spring 2020. Everything else seems like a luxury, but 2019 was that was a long, tough, weird year, guys. Holy shit.
And it's cool because you also were able to deliver on the Damien comp as well, because I had a couple people who had to drop off, and I remember asking you, it's just like, it could be as long as you want, or as short as you want, I shouldn't say as long, I was still trying to keep like a 5-minute thing. And you're like, no problem. And then I get this track that's 18 seconds. It's like, perfect. I love that. That's perfect.
Well, I'm happy you brought attention to that, because part of the thing with that Throbbing Gristle box set, and you remember this, I think, it's 4 CDs that are 4 hours, 44 minutes, and 44 seconds long. And I was delighted by this. And so with Astray, a record that I feel like is pretty steeped in Judaism, it's an 18-minute record. And of course, 18 is a magical Jewish number, high, life. The album ends with, the normal version of the album ends with a sample from Fiddler on the Roof, which is such a wonderful, I mean, I know it must feel a little hackneyed, but like, it's such a great Jewish musical because it's just all about like suffering and not knowing what meaning is and having to live in that ignorance as part of a spiritual experience. But so then when you asked for the bonus track, I made it 18 seconds. So the yet unreleased Japanese edition is a delightful 18 minutes and 18 seconds. And we're recording this the day I should be in day 2 of my trip to Japan.
Yeah.
Which one of the many casualties, thankfully a non-human fatality of this nightmare. But yeah, so working with that 18 was really fun. So it was nice to have an excuse to double it up.
Totally. And for people watching, a lot of you may not know that there is a Japanese edition of Astray, and it includes that bonus track that has the song that's on the Damien compilation. And our friend Jorge did all the illustration and layout, and Josh went off and had it all interpreted in Japanese. So it looks just like the domestic version of Astray, but it's all in Japanese. And it's limited to 50 copies for you nerds.
I'm not going to butcher his name, but the very generous young man who helped me translate it has a couple bands that rule. Man Breast is his power violence band.
Nice.
And Dish Rag is his noisecore band. And I want to plug those because he was so great. And while we're talking, I want to say working with you has been a real treat. Working with Jorge, you're incredibly patient and very gifted artistic wing of the operation. For Astray in particular, I really wanted it to look like an 80s, like I wanted it to look like a Stalin or a Death Side or like an 80s, 90s Japanese hardcore band, because bands like Warhead, lyrically and visually had a big impact on me. And I described something to Jorge, actually both with the Astray and the Lathe that we did.
Yeah.
It's such a pleasure to work with someone. And I think, me and Jorge talked about this, he's a tattoo artist. So he gets where it's like, if I'm requiring draft number 30 of something, he understands why. I don't have to, I am a precious little prince, but he makes me feel like it's slightly less indulgent. He's just very patient and easy to work with. And I think the art speaks for itself. I can't wait to get a Jorge tattoo, and this is all over.
Oh, I know. I actually have a tattoo that I'm supposed to be getting from him, but unfortunately, like a lot of this crap has been going on, and we've had some schedule changes with like little brief jaunts and tours just due to schedules. So one day I'll get a tattoo by him. Yeah, so you kind of went into that. I was happy. I was curious to know, like, you know, how you feel like the experience has been with, I guess, working with Damien in general, you know?
Well, I mean, you need to work with people who trust you and who you trust. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think there's like this experience in the underground to flock towards like really famous established labels that have this like, this is what we do, and when you're on our team, you're get your jersey on, you're part of the club now. And I've done labels, I've worked with some labels that have a very certain like set aesthetic, but there's something really delightful about working with someone like you and your folks where nothing's off the table. The enthusiasm and the boundlessness of the vision, you know, I feel like your label is not, you didn't enter our project with a preconceived notion. I was like, I've got an idea. It's going to be a synth-driven psychedelic noisecore record about Judaism. And you were like, great. And I was like, and it's going to be a mini CD. And you were like, let's do it. And I was like, this is fucked up. So, you know, that's special. You know what I mean? And I think that, certainly in a world as small as noise, I think it's when you get into the habit of just making noise towards a shared aesthetic vision that's maybe always a little out of reach, I don't know, it can feel a little disappointing. But when you're doing like a really personal thing and you're working with a label that's going to match your really personal vision with their own enthusiasm, because all of your ideas have been great and all of Jorge's ideas have been great.
Awesome.
And I don't know. I would say it feels more like in Mad Men, you know, like they're always the smaller firm with a very high quality, because you're getting that personal experience. Don's taking you out to the brothels to slam whores and drink old fashions, and you're like, oh, I can really work with this guy, you know.
Sure.
It feels more like that. Like I feel like with Damien, I'm not filling out a form to submit or something. It's really both the lathe cut and the mini CD are so ridiculously specific and full of detail that's so cartoonish that I feel like it's literally outside of the box, which is nice.
Nice. I guess it just comes from I was lucky enough to work with a handful of labels in the 90s and early aughts where the label owners were our friends or people we'd grown to become friends with that we respected, like Mike from Trouble Man Unlimited, our pal Nick, who's sadly no longer with us, who did Blood of the Young. They let us do what we wanted to do, you know, like there was a reason why they wanted us on their label, because they were fans themselves. So it's just like to be able to be in a band, as you know, and just like, you know, you've probably had times where you've released something and there was always like, you know, these like guidelines that you have to follow, or there was like, you know, well, I don't really like that art, or I don't really, you know, I disagree with like how you want to lay this out. I might interject now and then, but it's more like just like my 2 cents, you know, and it's never like this stonewalling, because that's not the point. Like the point is like, I just want whoever I'm doing something for just to be happy. And if anything, maybe even like a little bit surprised on how well it came out, you know, because first handful of releases, I was stressing. I was like, I just hoped that people enjoyed it. You know, if I messed up with doing some X-Acto cutting, I'm like, they're going to hate this. And I tear it up and I'd go on to the next one, you know, just, to, you know, I also thought about like how many times where like in the past where I'd purchased something on, you know, through mail order and then get a package and then like they'd throw a flyer in, they'd handwrite a note, they'd add a sticker or two. And that was like the connection you had with that label. It was almost like they opened up a little bit, and you could tell like they care, you know, they're really happy that they got your order and they were stoked to get it to you. And then over time, it feels like, I was doing a lot of pre-orders, vinyl pre-orders and stuff over the last 5 years and such. And it's just like, there's just been this disconnect from the purchaser and fan and the people who were putting it out. And there just was nothing exciting anymore in the packages. There was nothing really in the records. The colored vinyl was all starting to look the same, even though it's different colors. And it's just like, I don't want to be a part of that,
Right. Well, you're hitting on something that makes me trust you, because we're both just huge nerds, and like I have deliberately out of frame as my various collections. Like it's obsessive, and you get to a point, 10 years. Again, I've been doing Limsbin for at this point basically like a dozen years, which is crazy. Mm-hmm. But like you don't want to put something out that you wouldn't want to buy or listen to.
Exactly.
Totally. And I see a lot of people who seem to sleep easy at night putting out some extremely unambitious shit, and there's a lot of it.
Completely. I think a lot of it too is like they, I think there's that idea that they have to get their roster up to, or lack of a better term, a roster, or like their releases of that year, and they're just are so quick just to be able to get it out no matter what, and that's fine. If it's just about like just putting out a ton of stuff, then that's great. But I do feel that there is something a little bit more involved when you want to like spend a little bit more time on each release, or like, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words with that, but yeah, I think you get what I'm saying. It's just more or less, it's like, I want each release to feel like it's different from the last one. Like this isn't the only way they'll tell that it's a Damien release is because there's so many damn stickers and buttons involved, or it's stamped or numbered. Like, okay, I see that demon head, so I get it.
This is what I love about Damien. You get it. Like at this point in my life, like I more want to buy a CD box set of like 5 records with liner notes and like that, so I want to invest in something. I want something where I'm gonna like learn about. I'm gonna have enough points of articulation in this final product that the art that I'm like. You want to feel that relationship with something. That's when people talk about, the fading glory of the physical release. It's because people put out terrible physical releases for so long, or like boring. Yeah,
totally.
So I want pins. I want stickers. I want the sense of like, oh, this is, we're not just stockpiling consumables, which in reality I'm sure is mostly what we're doing, but I want to be like, I'm living a story, I'm engaging with this thing, like it's there's a narrative and a mythos to it, and I that's what I want to do with Limsbin, is give people this experience with something that's not just oh yes, it checks off the following boxes and it can a fine addition to any collection. I want it to be like, oh, the package came and all the stuff came spilling out and the lyrics were really weird, and I had to engage with this strange format that made me feel like I was having an experience that's not just another LP or like another download code. And I don't know, I think with Damien, you guys gave me a lot of space to dream big, and that's what else can you ask for?
Nice. And it's what's cool too, because there's other labels that are far more really well known, like say like Youth Attack or something, that still puts in that same amount of like, I mean, no one can like is as ambitious as like McCoy is with like his like test presses and all that stuff, but it just blows my mind that even to this day that he's like hand cutting, folding, gluing all those test presses, and it's never just one. It's like, I've got 6 releases this month, and like, and I like that's, and it's like, he's been doing that for 20 some years. And we have other friends who have been doing this for the same amount of time that have that hands-on experience with the packaging. And I love that, whether it's like I'm getting something through Death Traders or through Mark. I'm a big fan of people who you tell that they have their hand in every copy of whatever they're putting out, and it gives me inspiration.
The part of this experience that's like mail art, the part of this experience that's like really plugging into like a folk tradition of telling strange stories in a simple, accessible, handmade, that's the part of the experience. And I think I love digital downloads. I love streaming shit, whatever. I'm 2019, 2020, baby, we're here. But yeah, I mean, like if you're going to put your hands on something, it should be a rich part of that fabric.
Totally.
And so I don't know, you got to do it, babe. You got to do it. You got to do it.
Well, so before we wrap up, what's next? What's on the agenda? Granted, besides that, you know, there's a lot of what if or what will happen in our general society right now. But I mean, you still record on your own, you know, and we still can release things. But I mean, what's on your plate for the year? Or do you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was the great wiping clear year where this was, you know, in a lot of ways going to Tokyo and playing with fucking incapacitants and Astro and like weeds and like the list is endless. Like I was really gearing up for that to be this like spiking the football at, you know, this point in the project's history. So yeah, now, you know, honestly, I see Astray in a lot of ways as the blueprint for moving forward, where I think I look at like the 7-inch I did on Wyatt Records, the Blast Anthemics for New Generation event of Ecstatic Youth, and like the editing on that, the editing on Astray, I think that experience has been really rewarding, like really piecing together a Limsman experience and not just having it be like what the live set is. So yeah, I'm working on a new batch of lyrics. I think this time in isolation, for complicated reasons, I've been away from my partner for some times during this, which sucks. But I've had a lot of time alone to like explore my mind and explore memories that I've been holding on to and places that I go to in isolation, and imagining this other 2020 where this never happened. And, you know, just in general, I think trying to find ways to, with the sound, I just bought a new noise box that I'm really excited about. I've been relentlessly making field recordings during this time all around Berkshire County. So yeah, I think another moody, atmospheric, long form exploration is in order. You know, I know we've talked about our plans for what we're going to do next because the lathe cut thing went so wonderfully. Yeah. So yeah, more broody, self-indulgent art from a New England Jew.
Awesome. Well, I don't know. I just want to say thanks for wanting to be a part of this, and it's been a good conversation. And I don't know. I look forward to what we have to do, you know, from here on out, because you definitely have a home with Damien anytime, you know, and we'll come up with far crazier things. It's just going to get more ridiculous. So
well, that was very much on the record. I see we're still recording, so you're now bound to that commitment. And hey, I love you to death, man. It's been a really great experience. I am so heartbroken we didn't get to see the twins and have a hot dog and party in Fargo, but we'll do it soon. And I love the label, and it's having a home at Damien feels like, after over a decade of this bullshit, like a lovely place to be. And the next record, better than the last one.
Oh yeah. Well, thanks everybody. Hope you enjoyed our first episode. You take care.
Bye.